What is the difference between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript?
HTML is the structure layer. It defines what is on the page, like headings, paragraphs, images, and forms. CSS is the presentation layer. It controls how those elements look, including colors, fonts, spacing, and layout. JavaScript is the behavior layer. It makes the page interactive, so things like button clicks, form validation, and fetching data without reloading the page all happen through JavaScript. HTML is the skeleton, CSS is the appearance, and JavaScript is the muscles that make it move.
What are semantic HTML elements, and why should we use them?
Semantic HTML elements are elements that describe the purpose of the content they contain. For example, instead of using a div for everything, I'd use header for the page header, nav for navigation, main for the main content, and footer for the footer. I use semantic elements because they make the code easier to read and maintain, improve accessibility for screen readers, and help search engines better understand the page, which is good for SEO.
What's the difference between ID and class?
The difference between an ID and a class is that an ID is used for a single, unique element on a page, while a class can be reused across multiple elements. ID selectors have higher specificity than class selectors in CSS. I mostly use classes because they're reusable and make the code easier to maintain. I use IDs when I need to uniquely identify an element, such as for JavaScript, anchor links, or accessibility purposes.
Can you explain the CSS box model?
The CSS box model is how the browser determines the size and spacing of every HTML element. Every element is made up of 4 parts: the content, padding, border, and margin. By default, when you set a width or height, it only applies to the content area, which is called content box. If you use box sizing, border box, the padding and border are included within the specified width and height. I usually prefer border box because it makes layouts more predictable and easier to manage, especially in responsive designs.
What is the DOM?
The DOM, or Document Object Model, is the browser's representation of an HTML page as a tree of objects. Every HTML element becomes a node that JavaScript can access and manipulate. For example, I can use JavaScript to change text, update styles, add or remove elements, or respond to user actions like button clicks. It's basically the bridge between HTML and JavaScript.
What is the difference between comparison operator and strict equality operator in JavaScript?
The main difference is that comparison operator compares values after automatically converting their types if needed, while strict equality operator compares both the value and the data type without any type conversion. Because of that, strict equality operator is more predictable and helps prevent unexpected issues caused by automatic type coercion.
What is the difference between let, constant, and var?
Var is function scoped and can be redeclared, which can sometimes lead to unexpected behavior. Let is block scoped and can be reassigned, while const is also block scoped but can't be reassigned after it's declared.
What is responsive web design?
Responsive web design means creating websites that automatically adjust to different screen sizes, whether it's a desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. I usually use CSS media queries along with Flexbox or Grid to build layouts that adapt to different devices. The goal is to give users with a good experience regardless of the screen they're using.
What is Flexbox?
Flexbox is a CSS layout system that's designed for arranging elements in a single direction, either horizontally or vertically. It makes it much easier to align items, control spacing, and center content without writing complicated CSS. I usually use Flexbox for things like navigation bars, buttons, cards, or any layout that's mainly in one direction.
What is CSS Grid?
CSS Grid is a layout system that lets you create two-dimensional layouts using both rows and columns. It's very useful for building complete page layouts because you have precise control over where each element is placed. I typically use Grid for larger page structures and Flexbox for arranging items inside those sections.
What is the difference between inline, block, and inline block elements?
A block element starts on a new line and takes up the full width available. An inline element only takes up as much space as its content and stays on the same line. An inline block element also stays on the same line, but unlike an inline element, you can set its width and height.
What is event bubbling?
Event bubbling is how events travel through the DOM. When an event, like a button click, happens, it first runs on the target element and then bubbles up through its parent elements. This is useful because it allows event delegation, where a single parent element can handle events for multiple child elements, making the code simpler and more efficient.
What are promises in JavaScript?
A promise is an object that represents the result of an asynchronous operation, like fetching data from an API. A promise can be in one of three states: pending, fulfilled, or rejected. Instead of writing nested callbacks, I usually work with promises using async and await because the code is much easier to read and maintain.
What is the difference between null and undefined?
Undefined usually means a variable has been declared but hasn't been assigned a value yet. Null, on the other hand, is a value that we intentionally assign when we want to represent no value, or an empty object reference. So, undefined is generally automatic, while null is something we set ourselves.
What are HTTP methods?
HTTP methods define what action we want to perform on a server. The most common ones are get, post, put, patch, and delete. Get retrieves data, post creates new data, put replaces existing data, patch updates part of it, and delete removes data. When working with REST APIs, I choose the method based on the operation I need to perform.
What is the difference between cookies, local storage, and session storage?
All three are used to store data in the browser, but they serve different purposes. Cookies are usually used for authentication or session management because they're sent with every HTTP request. Local storage keeps data even after the browser is closed, while session storage only stores data for the current browser tab and clears it when the tab is closed. I choose the one that best fits the application's requirements.
What is the difference between synchronous and asynchronous code?
Synchronous code runs one task at a time and waits for each task to finish before moving to the next one. Asynchronous code allows long-running tasks, like API requests or file uploads, to run in the background so the application doesn't freeze. In JavaScript, I usually handle asynchronous code with async and await because it makes the code much cleaner and easier to understand.
How do you optimize a website's performance?
I usually start by optimizing images and compressing or minifying CSS and JavaScript files. I also use lazy loading for images, enable browser caching, and reduce unnecessary network requests whenever possible. These techniques help pages load faster, improve the user experience, and can also have a positive impact on SEO.
What is the difference between position, relative, absolute, fixed, and sticky?
These values control how an element is positioned on a page. Relative positions an element relative to its normal position. Absolute positions an element relative to its nearest position parent. Fixed positions an element relative to the browser window, so it stays in the same place even when you scroll. Sticky behaves like a normal element until you scroll to a certain point, then it sticks in place. I usually use absolute for overlays or icons, fixed for navigation bars or floating buttons, and sticky for headers that stay visible while scrolling.
What are closures in JavaScript? What are closures in JavaScript?
A closure is a feature in JavaScript where an inner function can access variables from its outer function, even after the outer function has finished executing. This is useful for things like data privacy, maintaining state, and creating reusable functions. I often see closures used in callbacks, event handlers, and functions that need to remember values.
What is hoisting in JavaScript?
Hoisting is JavaScript's behavior of moving declarations to the top of their scope before the code is executed. Variables declared with var are hoisted and initialized with undefined, while let and const are also hoisted but can't be accessed before they're declared because of the temporal dead zone. Function declarations are fully hoisted, so they can be called before they're defined.
What is the difference between map, filter, and for each?
These are all array methods, but they have different purposes. Map creates a new array by transforming each element. Filter creates a new array with only the elements that match a condition. For each simply loops through the array to perform an action and doesn't return a new array.
What is the event loop?
JavaScript is single-threaded, which means it can only execute one task at a time. The event loop allows JavaScript to handle asynchronous operations, like timers and API calls, without blocking the main thread. It continuously checks whether the call stack is empty, and if it is, it moves completed tasks from the callback queue to the call stack for execution.
What is the this keyword?
The this keyword refers to the object that is executing the current function. Its value depends on how the function is called. In an object method, this refers to the object itself. In arrow functions, this is inherited from the surrounding scope instead of creating its own.
What is the spread operator and the rest operator?
Both use the same syntax, but they do opposite things. The spread operator takes an array or object and spreads its elements out. The rest operator collects multiple values into a single array. I use spread when I want to copy or merge arrays, and I use rest when I don't know how many arguments a function will receive.
Thanks for listening. If you found this useful, don't forget to like and subscribe.